I'm May, and this is May May's Crochets. I'm a beginner crocheter sharing my learning to crochet journey, and today I'm going to share the next Woobles that I made. This time it's Roosevelt the Moose. I've been working my way through a whole bunch of Woobles as a way to learn how to crochet. I have a playlist that's getting quite long on my channel, which I will link to, of all of the previous Woobles that I've made. But today I want to share Roosevelt the Moose. So let's start off by looking at the packaging. So this is the kit, Roosevelt the Moose Learn to Crochet Kit. It's all in one, all materials included. Here's how he's supposed to come out. Let me turn him around. And just like all the other Woobles, it has absolutely everything you need to make this project in the kit. We've got yarn, step-by-step videos, pre-started piece, crochet hook, stuffing, plastic eyes, yarn, needle, and online instructions. So here we go, Roosevelt the Moose. Let me show you how he came out. Here he is. Look at him. Okay, let me turn him around. Here's what he looks like from the front. Here's the top. You can see his goofy antlers. And the back, and then the bottom. So let's talk through Roosevelt. I wasn't sure if I should wait for him until sort of closer to like winter, if sort of a moose was more of a kind of winter animal, which I thought about, but I actually have a couple more Woobles that are definitely more kind of holiday-ish and definitely more snow-related that I'm holding off on doing until then, possibly. But I was kind of ready to start another Woobles, and I have a few more to go. So I pulled out Roosevelt the Moose. Maybe he is a little wintry. Maybe moose. Is moose plural? Moose? Not meese, right? Maybe moose are, a little bit more of a kind of winter-related type animal. But, it's okay. I went with it. It's still only technically September right now. But we are headed into fall. So anyway, I went with making him. We got these basically brown yarn and this tan yarn. The Wooble body was pretty standard, similar to a lot of the other bodies. A little bit, maybe slightly different shape, like sometimes they're much more of an egg, like a symmetrical egg shape, versus this one's a little bit thinner on the top and wider on the bottom, but very, standard pattern with like single crochet increase, lots of single crocheting, and then starting to do decreasing and closing up the bottom. So that part was pretty standard. I will say the rest of the pattern I had some frustrations with, and actually some frustrations specifically with kind of the Woobles and the way they are in a few ways that I've mentioned a little bit before in some other videos, but I did end up with some frustrations on this one, but I am still happy with how he came out, and what a goofy little moose. So after the body, I think next up you do the nose, snout. I don't even know what they actually called it on the moose. And like this is really just not my favorite part, looking at it in the end. I showed when I showed my husband this when I was done with it, he looked at it and he said, that looks like a pig, which made me laugh. And it does. This does look like a pig snout. And I do think you could do this exact same pattern minus the antlers in like maybe pink yarn, and it would definitely end up looking like a pig, and that would be totally right. So I don't know, the snout, it tells you what to do. It actually was pretty interesting because it has you start a small foundation chain, and then you crochet into kind of both sides of the chain, which is actually something I just did on my last Wooble, Oishi the Sushi. It's for sort of the egg part of the sushi, the top of the sushi, the yellow, it's called the tamago. And that was the first time I did this, where it was a slightly longer chain. And you then like crochet into all of sort of the regular like back, I guess, stitches of the chain, but then you circle back, or you kind of keep going and go into, again, the bottoms of the chain, and then you kind of keep going. And in that one, you keep going up and up and up, and you make this oval. And I kept saying it's kind of like a pita pocket, versus this one, I guess it's a little bit of a pita pocket too, but it ends up a little bit more oval, a little more circular. You just kind of keep going around a few more times and build up this sort of circular, ovular shape. And the videos for this, I have to say, were really not the best. I had the same experience on Oishi the Sushi, where it's really not that clear exactly which stitches you're supposed to go into, versus when they teach the beginnings of like a magic ring and stuff. They are like the first few stitches in the top of they give you actually a pre-started piece, but when they go over the first few stitches, they are so careful in the videos about showing you like exactly which hole your crochet hook should go into. They say like, oh, you might think it goes into this hole, but look very carefully at the V and, poke it through here. And I really wish they did that in that amount of detail on these really kind of newer skills like this, crocheting into the chain, because I really would benefit from it. Both on this one and on Oishi the Sushi, I remember not being super clear about always which kind of stitch to be going into, especially towards like the ends. And I felt like in both of those patterns, that maybe the number wasn't adding up correctly, that it wasn't the right number in the end of stitches. And they do technically, I could like reach out. They have a good, like, I think you can email them and they'll write back to you, and they'll maybe even get on a call with you, which is really cool. So maybe I should actually reach out and ask, or I'm sure I could like look up on the internet or ask on Reddit or, something, get some crochet help out there with the pattern, just to kind of make sure I'm understanding how to do this correctly. But it may be that there's a couple times like at the end where it says to then like put 4 single crochets, I guess, into a stitch, and then you sort of turn it, and that's when you then go onto the bottom. And I'm wondering if like you actually really kind of do 2 on the top, and then really it's more like 2 on the bottom, and then you keep going, so that one doesn't really count. But it's not like super specified, and maybe that's something that just like people who have experience crocheting know how to do. But I could definitely see for a beginner like I am being very clear about this. And in the videos you'd think like you could be able to see it, and I really tried looking, like I watched multiple times, and it's too hard to tell. It's too quick, it's too just kind of puts the hook in one of the spots, and it's just, mine didn't look exactly the same. So anyway, I also had to redo it a couple times, because my first time I ended up with just like really big holes, I think, in these between these stitches. Something about crocheting into the chain, I don't know if I was like pulling too tight. I ended up with like way bigger holes than I think you would want. Like I think there's also an issue where just like regular crochet with this yarn ends up with holes. But it was like right in the middle of the nose, and it was like too big, and you could like really see the stuffing through. And so that wasn't great. Okay, so that was tricky for sure. Then my next issue was, it was really, this is a me issue, was sewing it on. You can sort of see the chain, right? There's like maybe 3 little holes in the middle. And I ended up with them it slanted, and I didn't say anything about it. I just really kind of tried to put it on like I would regularly, but it ended up slanted, and I kind of tried to fix it, but it just did not look good. So that was more of a me problem. I don't know if I wanted them to like specify to try to keep it straight, and it probably would have been fine. But really, no. I mean, you want this middle part to be sort of straight. And then my last issue with the nose to add to my list was actually the placement of it. So the pattern specified which rounds it should span, and it said to have it span like definitely below the eyes, starting below the eyes and then all the way down. So I did that. I followed the instructions and I did that. I ended up slanted. I ended up with holes. So in the end, I was going to redo it anyway, probably. But I did it, and it looked like the nose was really far down. And then I looked again at like the picture, and on their pattern as well, it had sort of different pictures. And like that nose is kind of at the same level at the top as the eyes. And that I think is a better look. Like, it makes sense because the nose is really big that it kind of goes all the way up until the eyes, and then it goes down from there. And so I realized like I really like the look of this better. I have these other issues, so I ended up undoing it and redoing it again to try to fix all of those things all at once. And I ended up having to kind of do it a couple times, to be honest. It's still, I just think it's still kind of goofy. Again, this like sort of pig snout or whatever. It's just like, is this what a moose looks like? I don't know, but it's what it is. It's what they have you do. And maybe that's like part of my issue, was just like, it just ends up looking a little bit goofy if you kind of look too carefully at it. But definitely some learning. things. I'm also learning in terms of like when it tells you where to sew it and like, oh, it should span rounds, whatever to whatever. And even if the pictures like don't match, it's like you can use your best judgment and do what you think looks good. Like I don't need to, I'm such a rule follower. I'm like, oh, well, the pattern says you have to do, this to this, but it's like, no, you can do what looks good to you, especially because yours might look a little different with your tension or gauge or something. So I'm learning that for myself. So that was definitely interesting and a little bit frustrating with the Woobles and sort of the videos and the placement of the patterns and things like that. But it's not the end of the world. So next up, I think, was the ears and then the antlers. So those parts were a little more standard. I felt better about doing and placing them. The ears were in brown, and you just do kind of some little, kind of small, few little rounds, and then when you sew them on, you just sort of connect it at the bottom. You go through kind of a bunch of times to make sure that they're secure. So it's kind of pulling up a little bit of stuffing, which is unfortunate, but that's that one. And then here's my other ear. You can sort of see my stitches kind of in that middle spot. Through kind of just the end. So that was fine. And it's kind of cool. They end up with this look that's kind of curved look because of the sort of the bowls of the crocheting. So that was cool. And then the antlers were also fine. You actually make each antler in two pieces, sort of a long piece and a short piece. Almost looks like a cactus if it were green. It had a little more pieces, but yeah, it's just, pretty standard rounds, kind of small, rounds of just like 4 or 6 or whatever, 8 or 9 stitches. And then you sew the small piece to the large piece, and then you sew the large piece onto the body. And I think again, they do specify which rounds, to put them in, to sew them in, which is always good. I remember being a little confused about sort of the angle. Like that's always something that's hard to specify, sort of the angle of the ears and the angle of the antlers. But then it's always good to sort of reference that, or like where exactly are the antlers in relation to the ears. So that's why it's good to have pictures to reference, and I can sort of decide, do I want it to look like this, or sort of adjust it in some direction. So that part was actually quite fine. And then in the end, they have you do the nostrils. So you can see just this little bit of black embroidery on each side of the nostril. I don't know if that really adds like all that much to it. Again, like, does this actually look like a moose? And also these antlers, like moose have these giant antlers with like, lots and lots and lots of parts of them, but obviously maybe that would be too complicated. So maybe my issue here is really just like in terms of the sort of realisticness of the moose as compared to maybe some of the others, or I feel like some of the others, it's more of a cutesy thing with a little smiley face. And you don't maybe care as much about it being realistic, but I think this is, in the end, as you can surely tell, maybe this one isn't my like absolute favorite of all the Woobles I've ever made, but still pretty fun. And especially kind of like the antlers and the ears, I feel pretty pleased with. It's just fun to like do like brown and tan yarn. These are like slightly different colors, but definitely experience with the nose. That was definitely a challenge on kind of a bunch of different levels. But for sure, as always, good learnings. I'm learning something new every time. Every new Wooble, I'm learning something new and practicing skills that I've already learned. So I think that's it for today. Thank you so much for keeping me company, and I'll see you next time. Bye.